Taiwan Strait. October 25, 1944. 2 o'clock in the morning, USS Tang, SS-306, runs on the surface. She is alone. Her 5th war patrol. In the darkness behind her, the burning hulks of 17 ships mark where she has been. She is down to a single torpedo. Her commander, Lieutenant Commander Richard O'Kane, gives the order to fire. The torpedo leaves the tube, runs straight for a moment, and then it doesn't. It curves, it broaches the surface, porpoises, and then, without explanation, without any logic of war, it curves back. O'Kane calls for emergency speed. Hard over. The men in the control room know what is coming before they feel it. Tang goes down in 180 feet of water. 78 men are lost. 9 survive, O'Kane among them, thrown from the bridge by the blast, pulled toward the surface by the current, breathing the night air of the Taiwan Strait. The Japanese frigate that fishes him from the water does not yet know what it has caught. The commander of the most successful submarine in the Pacific Fleet. The torpedo that sank her was Tang's own. The most successful American submarine of the entire Pacific War. Sunk on her last shot, by her own last weapon, not by a destroyer, not by a depth charge, by a defective torpedo that circled back. How does a torpedo come back and sink the boat that fired it? And how did the submarine service fight this war for nearly 2 years, before anyone in Washington would admit the weapons didn't work? Behind those questions lies the story of the most decisive and least celebrated campaign in the Pacific War. Japan in December 1941 is an island empire sustained entirely by sea. The home islands produce almost nothing that a modern industrial war requires. No oil, almost no rubber, negligible iron ore. The oil that powers the Imperial Navy comes from the Dutch East Indies. The rubber comes from Malaya. The iron ore comes from China. All of it moves by sea, tankers and freighters threading the same lanes week after week, from the resource territories to the factories of the home islands and back out as weapons and ammunition and aircraft. At the start of the war, the Japanese merchant fleet has a carrying capacity of roughly 6 million tons. That fleet is Japan's circulatory system. Without it, the empire cannot manufacture, cannot feed itself, cannot fuel its fleet. American naval planners understood this. War Plan Orange, refined through the 1930s into the Rainbow Plans, anticipated a Pacific War that would require sustained pressure on Japanese supply lines. The submarine was the primary instrument. On December 7, 1941, the United States has 50 commissioned submarines in the Pacific, 21 of them at Pearl Harbor. These boats carry the Mark 14 torpedo, the most recent model in quantity production, certified for combat use by the Naval Torpedo Station at Newport, Rhode Island. The Bureau of Naval Ordnance considers them ready. They are not. In the Philippines, the submarine force is the only American unit capable of contesting the Japanese invasion. It destroys 3 ships. In the early months of the war, patrols return with the same frustrating accounts: perfect shots, ideal ranges, the sound of the torpedo striking steel, and nothing. No explosion, no sinking. The commanders file their reports. The Bureau of Naval Ordnance reads them, and then the Bureau does something that will cost the United States 2 full years of the submarine campaign. It decides the problem is the men. There are 3 separate defects in the Mark 14 torpedo. They are discovered in sequence, one at a time, each fix revealing the next failure beneath it. The full accounting takes 21 months. The first defect, the torpedo runs too deep. From the first patrols of December 1941, commanders report that their weapons are passing beneath their targets. The Mark 14 runs 10 to 11 feet below its set depth. It passes harmlessly under the keels of ships. It should be striking amidships. The reports from the boats are consistent, documented, unmistakable. The Bureau's position is equally consistent. The torpedo is certified. The problem is the submariners. The second defect, the magnetic exploder. The Mark 14 is fitted with a device designed to detonate not on contact with the hull, but as the torpedo passes beneath the keel, where the ship's magnetic field is strongest and its structural integrity is weakest. Break a ship's keel and you break the ship. In practice, the exploder triggers on the ambient magnetic fields of the ocean long before it reaches the target. Torpedoes detonate hundreds of yards short. The flash of a premature detonation is credited to the target. It isn't. The third defect, the firing pin. Even after commanders disable the magnetic exploder and fire for direct contact, hits still fail to explode. The Mark 14's mechanical firing pin is too heavy. Under the force of a perfect 90-degree impact, the exact angle every captain is trained to achieve, the pin crumples on contact rather than driving forward into the warhead. The harder the shot, the more likely the failure. Lab tests conducted after the war confirm that the firing pin failed 70% of the time at a 90-degree hit. The weapon most reliably fails under the conditions most reliably achieved by a competent torpedo attack. Every patrol requires threading through enemy minefields, holding still under depth charges, calculating firing solutions down to the second. The men in these boats do all of this, and then watch the torpedo clang against the steel of the ship and slide away without exploding. They surface into harbor and are told again that the problem is their skill. The most infuriating documented case comes from the Philippines early in the war. Lieutenant Commander Frederick Warder, fearless Freddy to his crew, encounters an 8,000-ton Japanese transport riding at anchor in Talamo Bay. The ship is not moving, it is not evading. Warder fires 4 Mark 14 torpedoes at it. Every one either misses or fails to detonate. He reloads with the older Mark 10 torpedoes, pre-war weapons, simple, reliable, and sinks the transport with 2 shots. Then he writes a forceful report to his superiors. Nothing changes. The man who changes everything arrives at Fremantle, Australia, in June 1942. Rear Admiral Charles Lockwood, newly appointed commander of submarines in the Southwest Pacific, reads the patrol reports and does something the Bureau of Naval Ordnance had not done since before the war. He runs a test. Lockwood fires dummy torpedoes at known depths through fishing nets stretched across a harbor and measures where they strike. The results are immediate and unambiguous. The torpedoes are running 10 to 11 feet below their set depth. Every patrol, every boat, every Mark 14 torpedo fired in anger against Japanese shipping for the past 7 months. He takes his findings to Washington. The Bureau of Ordnance refuses to act. Lockwood's response has been quoted in every history of the submarine campaign since. The men in the boats had been told for a year that the torpedoes were fine and the problem was them. Lockwood, who had just proven in one afternoon what the Bureau spent a year denying, said it plainly. If the Bureau of Ordnance can't provide us with torpedoes that will hit and explode, then for God's sake, get the Bureau of Ships to design a boat hook with which we can rip the plates off a target's side. The depth problem is fixed. The magnetic exploder problem surfaces and is fixed. The firing pin problem surfaces and is fixed. The last of the 3 defects is finally resolved in September 1943, 21 months after Pearl Harbor. By the time the weapon works, submarines have fired 1,442 torpedoes in 1942 alone. Post-war analysis of Japanese records confirms the result. 109 ships sunk. 109 ships from nearly 1,500 torpedoes across an entire year. The campaign that should have been strangling Japan from the first month is hemorrhaging ammunition on a weapon its own institution refused to test. The boats are still going out. The men are still threading the minefields. They know the torpedoes are broken. They go anyway. Now, the weapons work, and Lockwood has one more problem to fix. Not every submarine commander is built for what this war requires. Cautious patrols wait for ideal conditions, fire conservatively, disengage, produce patrols that return to port having accomplished nothing. Lockwood reads the numbers and can see in them which commanders are fighting the war and which are managing their own survival. By 1943, he is removing the cautious ones and replacing them with something different. The clearest example of what he is looking for is a broad-jawed, physically imposing commander from Kentucky who goes by the nickname Mush. Dudley Morton takes command of USS Wahoo in December 1942. His first act is to address his crew on the deck of the boat with 4 words. Wahoo is expendable. He means it, and he means something more. The assumption shared by most commanders that a captain's first obligation is to bring his boat safely home. Morton does not share it. Wahoo is not a defensive platform. She is a weapon, and Morton intends to use her. Morton does something else that almost no fleet submarine commander is doing. He gives the periscope to his executive officer during attacks. While most captains monopolize the scope, keeping the tactical picture to themselves, Morton turns it over to Lieutenant Commander Richard O'Kane and commands the boat while O'Kane calls the shots. The trust this requires is not incidental. An entire crew watches their captain hand his most critical instrument to another man and understands, in that gesture, what kind of boat they are on. On Wahoo's 3rd patrol, Morton navigates into Wewak Harbor on the northern coast of New Guinea, using a chart obtained from an Australian woman's atlas. Wewak is a Japanese-held anchorage the enemy considers inaccessible to submarines. Morton enters submerged, finds a Japanese destroyer at anchor, and sinks it, the first American commander to penetrate an enemy harbor and destroy a ship therein. He brings Wahoo out intact, then hunts a convoy over the following days and destroys it. The submarine force has not yet seen what Morton is showing them at scale. What this campaign looks like when the weapons work and the right man is in command. He is not alone in this, and he is not working blind. By early 1943, code breakers have cracked the Japanese convoy routing cipher. American submarines are being positioned through intelligence the crews cannot be told the source of, directly in the path of convoys that would never have been found by random patrol. The submariners know only that their patrol areas are productive. The reason remains classified for decades. With this intelligence comes a revelation. Japan is running critically short of destroyers. The battles around the Solomon Islands have depleted the escort force faster than Japanese yards can replace it. A commander named Samuel Dealey understands what this means before most. Where Morton hunts everything, Dealey hunts the hunters. Soft-spoken, family-oriented, a Texan whom his executive officer described as having the mind of an artist. At sea, Dealey turns conventional doctrine inside out. When a destroyer detects USS Harder and charges, most captains go deep and evade. Dealey watches through the periscope as the destroyer closes on him, and he waits. At 1,000 yards, he fires 3 torpedoes directly down the destroyer's throat. It explodes and sinks. The following night, from 650 yards, he does it again. The numbers for 1943 tell the story of what this combination produces. Working weapons, aggressive commanders, precise intelligence. Roughly 335 Japanese merchant ships, totaling approximately 1.5 million tons. Nearly double the previous year, and the year is only the beginning. By 1944, Japan's merchant fleet is dying. Not quickly. There is no single decisive engagement that breaks it. It is dying the way a man loses blood from a wound he cannot close, steadily, through every route, in every ocean, month by month. Part of what makes this irreversible is a decision Japan made, and then refused to reverse, about its merchant ships. The convoy system is not a secret. The British deployed it in the First World War and are deploying it again in the Atlantic. Japanese naval staff understands the concept, they decline to implement it. The reasoning, documented in post-war analysis, reaches back to Bushido. Escorting merchant ships is a defensive posture. It is beneath the dignity of a warrior's navy to shepherd cargo vessels. Construction of dedicated escort frigates does not begin until October 1943. By the time escorts launch in significant numbers, the damage to Japan's merchant fleet is already beyond repair. 2 full years of the Pacific War and unescorted Japanese merchant ships have been crossing the same routes on the same schedules without protection. The submarines have been learning those routes for 2 years. The escorts arrive too late to change anything. And then, on the night of November the 28th, 1944, a single submarine changes the arithmetic of the war in a way that even its own commander does not understand. USS Archer Fish is patrolling the waters south of Tokyo Bay when her lookouts spot what they identify as a large tanker moving south on a clear night. Commander Joseph Enright orders a surface track. He has no way of knowing what he is actually following. No one in American naval intelligence knows. The ship was built in total secrecy, reclassified mid-construction, never photographed by Allied sources. What Enright is following is Shinano. She began constructions, the third of the Yamato-class battleships, and was converted after the Battle of Midway into an aircraft carrier. At 72,000 tons, she is the largest warship afloat in the world. She is moving south from Yokosuka to Kure for final fitting out, including the installation of her watertight doors, which have not yet been mounted. She has an inexperienced crew and no functional damage control capability, and her captain, Toshio Abe, is looking at his radar and seeing a contact that appears to be multiplying. He believes he is being tracked by a wolf pack. Enright tracks Shinano for 6 hours on the surface. He is alone. There is no wolf pack. But Abe, convinced he is surrounded, orders an escort that tries to engage Archerfish to stand down. He believes the submarine is a decoy, drawing his destroyers out of position to give the wolf pack a clear shot. He maneuvers Shinano aggressively to outrun a threat that does not exist. In doing so, he turns the largest warship in the world directly into Archerfish's firing solution. Enright fires. 4 torpedoes strike Shinano between the anti-torpedo bulge and the waterline. The crew cannot contain the flooding. The watertight doors are not installed. Shinano capsizes just before 11 o'clock in the morning. The largest warship afloat sinks in less than 8 hours, destroyed by one submarine, whose commander believes throughout the engagement that he has found a large escort carrier. Enright does not learn what he has actually done until after the war is over. He is awarded the Navy Cross for sinking what his report identifies as a 28,000-ton vessel. The ship was 72,000 tons. The largest warship ever sunk by a submarine. He had no idea. Abe's evasion, built entirely on a wolf pack that existed only in his radar interpretation, had aimed his ship at the only submarine in the water. It is the character of the entire campaign. American submarines, invisible and patient, destroying an empire that could not see the wound. Japan's oil from the Dutch East Indies can no longer safely reach the home islands. The great fleet that survived Midway sits at anchor in the south, its fuel tanks emptying. There is oil in the south and ships in the north, and no route to bring them together. The battleships and carriers that the surface navy fought so hard to preserve have nowhere to go. There is a cost to all of this that no number of sunken ships accounts for. 52 American submarines do not come home. In almost every case, there are no survivors, no distress signal, no wreckage recovered in time to say anything useful, just a boat that was expected in port on a given date, and then the silence that means it isn't coming. Mush Morton is in that silence. In October 1943, at the height of his legend, Wahoo was lost in La Perouse Strait. A post-war review of Japanese records eventually confirms it. An anti-submarine aircraft, 3 depth charges, oil rising to the surface off Hokkaido. Morton is gone with all 79 of his crew. The man who defined what the campaign could become, killed at the moment the campaign finally became it. A separate shadow hangs over his record. A January 1943 patrol during which Morton ordered fire on survivors of the troop ship Buyo Maru. The incident is documented, debated, and unresolved. The historical record does not adjudicate it. Neither will this one. Sam Dealey is lost in August 1944 off Luzon on Harder's 6th patrol. Japanese records describe an anti-submarine attack that morning. Oil, wood chips, and cork floating in the vicinity. His death moves through the submarine force as something beyond grief. The loss of a man who seemed to have found a way to make the war's most dangerous moment predictable, and then was taken by it anyway. Among the men who do come home, some carry a different kind of cost. American submarines operating on convoy intelligence cannot always know what their targets carry. The Japanese do not mark vessels transporting Allied prisoners of war. Submarines executing textbook attacks sometimes sink ships and learn years later, or never, that Allied soldiers were in the holds. The campaign that won the Pacific War also, unknowingly, killed the men it was being fought for. That stands without resolution. And then there is the silence around the victories themselves. The intelligence foundation of the campaign, Ultra, the broken Japanese codes, cannot be revealed during the war. The submarines that find their targets because a room in Washington is reading Japanese fleet communications cannot explain why they are so consistently finding targets. The campaign doing the most economically decisive damage of the Pacific War cannot be reported. The carrier battles get the newspapers, the island landings get the photographs, the submarines come back to piers and handshakes, and a silence that is, itself, the campaign's final operational requirement. Lockwood is at the pier. That is what there is. 9 men are pulled from the Taiwan Strait on the morning of October 25th. O'Kane is among them, alive in the water by chance and current. He is taken first to Ofuna, the Japanese Navy's secret interrogation facility, then moved to Omori. He is held for nearly a year. At liberation, he weighs less than 100 pounds. He knows, from the moment he surfaces in the Taiwan Strait, exactly what hit them. A circular run, a defective torpedo from the same family of weapons that had defined the campaign's failures and, eventually, its transformation, coming back one final time. He carries that knowledge through captivity and brings it home with him. In February 1946, President Harry Truman presents Richard O'Kane with the Medal of Honor. He retires from the United States Navy in 1957 as a Rear Admiral. He dies on February 16, 1994, and is buried at Arlington. The campaign he commanded a part of produced numbers that resist casual comprehension. American submarines were less than 5% of the Navy's total wartime fleet. They accounted for 56% of Japan's merchant marine losses. Over 1,000 merchant ships, a battleship, 8 carriers, dozens of destroyers, sunk by fewer than 16,000 men who ever served at sea. Japan's own government offered the clearest verdict. The Cabinet of Japan reported to the National Diet after the war that the greatest cause of defeat was the loss of shipping, not Midway, not the Battle of the Philippine Sea, not the carrier battles or the island campaigns. The slow, invisible closing of the sea lanes, the tankers that didn't arrive, the oil that didn't reach the fleet, the food that didn't reach the home islands. The men that verdict describes were not in the newspapers. They couldn't be. The code had to be kept. They came home to a country that celebrated what it could see. The Marines on the beaches, the carrier pilots above the fleet, the commanders of surface engagements. The submarines came back to piers and to Lockwood and to silence. 52 boats didn't come back at all.